Hello, Professor. This is Daniel Goodrum with my final project for graphics rendering class. I'm going to start off by going through the code features, talking about everything I implemented, and then I will get to the video of my final scene. So first, I just wanted to start off with my pre-made models. Um, Pretty standard stuff. Um, the ones I focused on is the six-faced repeating texture, the unit pyramid, the unit sphere, and the skybox. So I did an overloaded class, so you can just do one directly, and it sets it at scale 1. And I also did a additional one where you can input the scale here. Um, so then if I go into my model tools, just pretty straightforward. And so here is my unit box repeating texture. It goes in. Oh, that's not the right one. Sorry. I'll start off with the pyramid, I guess. So it goes in, sets the vertices, and then multiplies it by the size. So it gives you a scaled pyramid where all the vertices are set at those locations. Then it sets the normals. Same thing here for my unit sphere. It says the radius, and then it goes through and does all the math. And then here it sets the norm, and then it sets the norm again here when it creates the vertices. The six-sided face box with UV points and everything is here. Same deal. And the skybox is here. So all those are pretty straightforward. Creating all those models. The skybox, I don't have it in a standalone class. I just have it in here. I had it in its own file here, but I just went and I imported it into the standard model, so it made it easier. So that's all that for the standard models. The terrain class, I had a little bit of trouble with this one, getting it to go into the model class itself. So here I have my terrain model, and it creates the model within the class. So here it goes and sets everything, and then here at the end it just calls for a model of the trilis and everything. So you can set the height and the length. You can set all the dimensions in it. And then what I did was I just made it so you can have a get function, and it returns the model itself. So that works with the model class. So it works. Everything works great. I just didn't integrate it into my model class. Excuse me. My shader classes, the ones I'm going to focus on are my shader color light and my texture light. So here are my shader light. Pretty straightforward. You can set all your light parameters, your thin camera matrices, and then fog parameters. So it's pretty straightforward. You have all your structs and the buffer pointers to everything, and then within it goes through, sets up the buffers, input layout, zeroes out the data. Here are the releasing of everything in the destructor, and then goes through and updates and sends everything as required. The HLSL file for color light is here. So you have your material, your fog, shader models, and then your buffers here, your cam data, your light parameters, your instance data, and your fog data, and then computes the point light, the spotlight, and then in the output it does the calculations for your fog. Pretty straightforward. So my color shader light, the input, all it takes is the DirectX device. Shader texture light, very similar. The only major difference is down here. Where to put it? Is here when it's when you set the texture, it updates the context of the texture. Other than that, not a whole lot different for the shader texture light. The texture light HLSL file, once again, very much the same. Still including your fog, and does your lerp. I can't remember what that stands for, but it does all the math for the fog light. No graphics object stuff. Here's my texture light one. So this one, it takes a input as a shader, a model, and a texture, and then does everything from there. It just inputs everything, and then when you set everything, it also sets it to the shader, and then when you do the render, it sets the shader to context, the and the model and everything. So pretty straightforward there. And then for the color light, very similar. The big difference is that it doesn't take a wait, what am I looking at? I'm sorry, I went to the wrong one. Game object color light, here we go. The input, it doesn't take any texture, it just takes the shader and the model, and then does mostly the same stuff, just doesn't have to deal with the texture when it goes and renders everything. So let's see, that is it for all of those. Both of those classes, they're really the only ones I used in here. I did use the texture class for my skybox, but I'll get into that. But so both of those, the color light and the texture light, both use the fog model, and all have all their fog parameters set up. The graphics object classes, I went over those. The mirror class, I still haven't gotten it working, even from the homework, so yeah, I don't have that. So now I'll get into my actual code for my project. The majority of this was the issues with it were just me being picky and trying to make sure everything looks good. Oh, one thing I did not mention, sorry. For my model class, I did add the where you can load from a file, and that's all integrated into that, and then I'll show you where I did that. So in my .h file for my actual project, I have everything lined up along the side here. I kind of did this just so I could, it's easier to identify everything. Um, so starting here, standard camera, and then the world matrix. I actually have a few matrices, so I'll go over all of those. Um, so for my skybox, I have the model for the sky, the texture for the sky, the shader texture. This is the one where I only used the shader texture. I didn't include the light one because, um, yeah, I just used the shader texture, and the graphics object texture for that. And then I have a vector for where I have my direct light. My scene has like a moon in it, so that's where I made all my direct light come from. It's not where that moon is, it's just that direction. Um, my terrain, I have a terrain model, the model that I get from that. Um, the terrain texture. I originally tried this as just a texture without doing lighting, just to make sure it looked alright, and then I went back and changed it out to a shader texture light. So here I have that shader and then the graphic objects texture light. I'm using a pyramid, so same thing, model, texture, the shader texture light, and the graphics object texture light. I have two spheres, um, and then they each have their own world matrices associated with them. I have a tree. Um, I tried to do a plane, but I couldn't get any of the textures to work correctly, and they were just looking like crap. So I didn't use them. I still have them in the file, but I didn't go ahead and stick with it in there. I have a tree. This is an imported model. Um, it's kind of a crappy tree, but it does reflect light nicely, and so it's not too bad. And then I have a box. It's a repeated, or it's independent box. So I made it a dice, because that was in there. And then I have the matrix for that. And so that's really it for the H file. And then so let's go to the actual code for this. So I go up to the top here, initiate all my matrices, my world matrix. For the first one, that's what my that's what my pyramid is based off of. So I set my ground a little low, so it had to go down a bit. My world 2 and world 3, those are both for my spheres. I'll get into what I did with those in a little bit. My tree matrix, so when I imported the model, it was rotated, so I rotated it, and I didn't have an input to actually switch the scaling of the tree on input, so I had to scale it here. My box is placed on top of my pyramid, so you'll see that in a bit, and then the direction light where that is where that's located at. My first object is my skybox, so I create the shader. I create the sky model just from the skybox, and then 500 is my scaling factor for that model. The texture, and then I create my graphics object, passing in the sky, the texture, and the sky itself. I guess I should have probably done this in this code, but whatever. So when I set texture here, it sets the texture to the graphics object, and then I set the world. It doesn't change, so it's not a big deal. My terrain, still some commented out code from when I was messing with other stuff, but so I create a texture light, my input device, my terrain model here. So I use I'm using the height map test because I couldn't find a good one that I liked. This scaling factor is how big it is. The 50 is the maximum height of the hills and valleys in it. The -5 is the Y variable, and the UV repetition. So then I get the model here. I create the texture that I want to use. It's this nice dirt texture that was repeating correctly. And I create the graphics object, throwing in my shader, the model, and the texture. This doesn't change at all, so I set all the all the directional light parameters and everything here, which I actually could delete. I do end up changing it later because I'll show you why. My pyramid, same thing. I just get my shader texture light, my pyramid with the scaling factor, my texture, and create the graphics object. I don't mess with any of the light parameters here because I do it in the update, or sorry, in the draw phase. Circle. Once again, I have the directional light set up here, but I changed that anyway, so it's not needed here. And so same next, the two spheres are pretty much identical. Same scaling. Create the graphics object. The difference is they use two different worlds. World 2 and World 3. Once again, all this lighting information changes in the draw, so before I submit it, I'll comment it out. Tree. Here's the tree shader using texture light. I input the model using the file location. I input the texture from file, and I create the graphics object. I do all the lighting stuff in the draw phase. My box, just using a pre-made 6-face box, and create the texture. Set my world and orientation. I have it set up in a way so you can kind of get it starts at a nice place. And then I was also having an issue. I'll talk about this in the video, but every time I tried to use my mouse to rotate the perspective, it reset to the origin. So I don't know how to change that. I was trying to mess with it for a while, but I broke a bunch of stuff. So yeah, I don't. So if you are messing with this and you want to use the mouse, good luck. And also my frame rate on my desktop is really high. Like I'm getting like 5,500 frames per second. So when I use the keyboard to move, it's fine. But I had to adjust it on my laptop because I wasn't getting as high a frame rate. So when I was trying to move around, it was moving a lot slower because it was updating a lot slower. So on my update, here is my world matrix. I'm having both of these. World matrix says rotate. You'll see why in a minute. I was trying to get my plane to do some stuff, but it once again didn't get that working. And then to my draw scene. So my draw scene, I take clear my immediate context. My skybox, all I do is I set it to context, submit K matrices, and then I render it. Pretty straightforward. So for my first sphere, do my context and camera, and then I get a vector for its current position. I don't use that till later. And for this one, my two spheres act as points of light for other objects. So my camera, or for sphere 1, is one of the spheres is a point light, and the other sphere is a spotlight on my pyramid as they rotate around it. And then also one of them has a spotlight that covers the ground, so you can see the ground getting lit up as well, or the terrain. So here I get this position vector. I'll use that later, and well, I'll use it here too. But so I do the directional light for this one is my directional light for everything. It comes from where the planet-looking moon thing is on my scene. My point light parameter is the same because I want to keep it kind of dim, and then my spotlight comes from that's shining on this object comes from the cube that's on top of my pyramid. So I'm getting the box's location and then doing the vector from the box to where I'm at. I set the fog, and then I set the light parameters, and then I set it to context. For this one, it's very much the same. The only thing I'm doing differently is, well, it's on the other side of the pyramid, so I'm doing the new math for the new vector for the light for the spotlight for this one. And I'm setting a position for position 2 so I can use that in my pyramid. Other than that, pretty straightforward. When I'm doing my pyramid, I don't really need to update this every time. I'll change that before I submit it, because it's only used once. So here I am setting the context, and then my light parameters for this one. So I have my directional light on this one coming from my second sphere here, and my spotlight coming from the second sphere, and my point light is coming from this first sphere on this guy. So yeah, pretty much straightforward. I just used the default fog parameters on this one because I didn't really need the fog. So you'll see that. My terrain, I could do my light parameters up in the initiate section, which I'll move after I do this. And then I set my my point light for my terrain. I have a point light coming from one of my spheres, and then a spotlight coming from one of my spheres. And then I set the fog parameter. This one actually works pretty good because you can see the fog really well. And then I set the eye in the terrain. This one I have my directional light coming from my direction light position again. My point light from this one is coming from one of my spheres, and my spotlight is coming from one of my spheres. So pretty straightforward. This doesn't have any fog parameters either. And then my box is gets point light from one of the spheres and spotlight from one of the spheres, or from the same sphere, sorry. And that's it. It goes into the swap chain. Here's my plain code, didn't work. But yeah, that's it for my actual code, and then I'll show you the video. So here in my video, I have this. Oh, I used the mouse like I said not to. Sorry. So you can see here, there's a moon. I have my two spheres circling the pyramid with the spotlight and the point light. I'm gonna restart it because that yeah, the mouse is kind of a pain in this scenario. So as you can see here on the left, I have like a moon. I have like this night sky looking skybox. It's pretty nice. I have the terrain set up, and I have this pyramid with this dice on top. I have the tree and these two spheres. So you can see that the lighter purplish one, pinkish one on the video, I guess. If you look at when you're running it, it actually looks purplish. You can see the spheres themselves are getting the spotlight from the location of the dice on top. The lighter purple one is putting a spotlight on the pyramid, and the blue one is putting a point light on the pyramid, and the purple one is putting a point light on the ground, and the blue one is putting a spotlight on the ground, but it's very small and not noticeable. As you can see, the tree is getting lit from the purple sphere, so as it rotates, it gets lighter and darker. Looks pretty nice. The cube is a little bit harder to tell. The light comes around, and you can see it reflecting off of that, and then you can see the ground. It is getting point light from over here, and the fog, as you get closer, it diminishes, and you can actually see it. It has a nice repeating texture that actually like perfectly repeats. And then I use like this dirt texture on the pyramid, but it looks kind of cool with the lighting and the red effects and everything. So yeah, that's about it for my project. I'll go ahead and make those couple of changes on my code that I talked about before I actually submit it. But yeah, that's it. Thank you much. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you.